Hello, this is Professor Paul Arthur Berkman, Director of the Science Diplomacy Center at Tufts University. It gives me honor and pleasure to share with you the Pan-Arctic Options Project, Holistic Integration for Arctic Coastal Marine Sustainability, that has been supported by the Belmont Forum between 2015 and 2020. The most important element of the project is certainly the team. The team is of an international nature: United States, Canada, Norway, France, Russia, and China. The project Pan-Arctic Options includes an earlier project called Arctic Options. Both of these projects involved holistic integration for Arctic coastal marine sustainability. They both involve options, and these are elements I will describe to you shortly. Two funding mechanisms that were available from the United States where the project was originally proposed. One was the Arctic Science and Engineering and Education for Sustainability project through the National Science Foundation, and then the other was the Belmont Forum Arctic Observing and Research for Sustainability. Both of these projects involve science diplomacy as a language of hope, involving international, interdisciplinary, and inclusive, which have collectively been defined as holistic. So the word holistic is in both of the projects. Involving informed decision-making to balance national interests and common interests for the benefit of all on Earth across generations. This is an important challenge we collectively face at local to global scales now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Pan-Arctic Options Project has been approaching this issue for the better part of the last decade. Science, in the context of science diplomacy, is the study of change. It recognizes that natural sciences, as well as indigenous knowledge and social sciences, all reveal patterns, trends, and processes that become the bases for decisions. And in the essence, the challenge is to contribute to informed decisions that operate across time and space. In this sense, the natural sciences, indigenous knowledge, and social sciences, to be international, interdisciplinary, and inclusive, can be considered as the study of change. In terms of time and in practical terms of decision-making, there is a continuum of urgency at the level of peoples, nations, in the world. This continuum extends from security timescales, mitigating immediate risks of political, economic, societal, and environmental instabilities, to sustainability timescales that involve balancing societal, economic, and environmental considerations across generations. And out of this came the notion that an informed decision operates across a continuum of urgencies. This led to the idea and insight that at one time scale, there are challenges with resolving conflicts, and conflict resolution is a major primary source of negotiation strategy. The other end of the spectrum, at a sustainability timescale and across from current to future time, is the challenge to build common interests. And we certainly sense this as an urgency in the world that we have today with the COVID-19 pandemic. The methodology for informed decision-making starts with questions, inquiry, the essence of science itself, to understand change. The questions frame the challenges ahead, and when there are questions of common concern, they reveal the methodologies, whatever the methods, natural sciences, social sciences, indigenous knowledge, to address the questions. The stages of questions and data are research. The stages beyond that, taking the data and questions in the context of institutions, turns the research into actions, evidence for decisions, as well as options. And options are without advocacy. They can be used or ignored explicitly. And in this sense, the diplomacy of science diplomacy is with the options. They are in contrast with recommendations that underlie agendas, whether rightfully or wrongly. The objective simply is to contribute to informed decisions that operate across a continuum of urgencies. And through this process, build common interests as well as enhance research capacities. In terms of data, just as an example, the Pan-Arctic Options Project has been working with the oldest, longest continuous record of Arctic maritime traffic from the automatic identification systems collected by satellites. We've interpreted this north of the Arctic Circle and have used several bounded regions within the Arctic Ocean area to assess changes in maritime traffic over time, namely in the Bering Strait region and in the Barents Sea region. These are just examples of the types of products that are available with innovations in the cloud that allow for big data processing, terabyte of information or thereabouts in terms of the ship traffic over the period from 2016 to 2009. Composite ships across time, individual ships by time. We can also bring in ancillary data that are collected by satellite, in this case, the National Snow and Ice Data Center, profiles of daily ice concentrations around the Arctic Ocean. We can look at this in terms of ship-ice interactions by nation. We can look at it in terms of ship-ice interactions by time and latitude, showing that it's moving northward into more ice-infested areas during the period from 2009 to 2016. The integration of data into evidence involves the institutions that will be making decisions. And in the case of the Arctic Ocean, we have, since 2011, binding agreements that have emerged: the Arctic Search and Rescue Agreement, the Marine Oil Pollution Preparedness and Response Agreement, and the Arctic Science Agreement, enhancing international Arctic scientific cooperation. We also have the Polar Code that emerged through the International Maritime Organization, and a Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries, High Seas Fisheries Agreement that is in the process of being ratified. In terms of options, one option that exists in the Arctic for consideration and elsewhere in the world on a planetary scale is the challenge of balancing national interests and common interests, not national interests alone, recognizing that we live in a globally interconnected civilization. In this sense, the law of the sea, which all of the Arctic states and indigenous peoples remain committed to, involves national interests in the framework of nations looking inward in terms of their continental shelves and the sea floor. And at the same time, the law of the sea provides provisions with the high seas as an area explicitly beyond sovereign jurisdictions, where the international community collectively looks outward in terms of their common interests. The challenge is one of balancing national interests and common interests. The products of the Pan-Arctic Options Project have been extensive, ongoing, accelerating throughout, perhaps as a metric of convergence or as a metric of change in terms of the contributions. There is an acceleration of knowledge co-production that is emerging with the Pan-Arctic Options Project. It involves two books. One is the Baseline of Russian Arctic Laws, which is the oldest continuous record of laws from the Russian Federation going back to the beginning of the 19th century. More recently, governing Arctic seas, regional lessons from the Bering Strait and Barents Sea. These were constructed with scientific, with societal, environmental consideration. A number of papers have emerged in peer-reviewed journals, including Science and Journal of Geophysical Research, European Foreign Affairs Review, Ocean Development and International Law, among others. In addition, the Pan-Arctic Options Project has generated a new serial on science diplomacy action, bringing together insights from foreign ministry science and technology advice networks, as well as collaboration among foreign ministries more specific to the Arctic in terms of the Arctic Science Agreement. The products of the Pan-Arctic Options Project have accelerated to the level of the United Nations, which is now training science diplomacy and informed decision-making in relation to our global pandemic, as well as regionally within the Middle East and globally. Also involved with science training in terms of science diplomacy training and international law. In terms of lessons learned from the Pan-Arctic Options Project, certainly it is working across a continuum of urgencies from security to sustainability timescales. The relevance of balancing national interests and common interests is felt deeply now during a global pandemic, during a period when we have exponential change. At some point, we will reach an inflection point, and there will be a deceleration during a logistic phase as we develop solutions that are sustainable. The same type of acceleration, exponential change, is seen on a global scale over decades to centuries in terms of both carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as well as global human population growth. And the challenge that we collectively face is to operate in the face of exponential change. We see this also in terms of high technology and Moore's law, for example, in terms of years to decades. So the challenge we collectively face is one of responding to change, to make informed decision-making, to make informed decisions that operate short-term to long-term. In terms of hope and inspiration from the Pan-Arctic Options Project, one of the options that we collectively face is to awaken a renaissance after the global pandemic. Certainly components of reading, writing, and arithmetic are important. They are necessary, but they are insufficient in a world with digital information. Arguably, the sufficiency will come from informed decision-making, a skill that can be taught starting in K through 12 with education, into universities where research skills are learned, and into professions where leadership skills are learned. The triangulation between education, research, and leadership is intended to awaken lifelong learning. In conclusion, the Pan-Arctic Options Project, focusing on the Arctic region north of the Arctic Circle, in the ocean, the dynamics of the marine system in terms of its biophysical nature, in terms of socioeconomics with shipping, for example, all recognize that the Arctic is part of a globally interconnected civilization. And the challenge is to operate in a manner with common interests, to think across generations, and to build a better world for our children and their children going forward. Thank you very much on behalf of the Pan-Arctic Options Project.